Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, June 18th, 2024. This week and next week, and maybe even the week after, we're going to think a little bit about a very key debate in postmodern philosophy of religion. A debate between two thinkers, Merold Westphal and John Caputo. The stakes of which, as I'm going to try to suggest, are quite high indeed. All right, I'll see you in a second. Now, we've talked a lot on this channel about philosophy of religion. I'm a philosopher of religion, after all. It's no wonder we think about those questions quite a bit. But we've also talked about postmodernism. And the reason that we do is because I also take very seriously postmodernism as the broad methodological or conceptual frame in which specific questions in philosophy of religion are best asked today. So, why is it that I want to think about Merold Westphal and John Caputo as these two twin pillars of the postmodern philosophy of religion discourse? The reason is this: they represent two different accounts of postmodernism and thereby two different approaches to what it means to think philosophically about religion where we are. On the one hand, Merold Westphal suggests that when we think about postmodernism, we primarily need to think of it as a kind of hermeneutic or epistemological sort of thing. In some ways, he refers to this as a kind of Kantian anti-realism. In other words, we're not denying certain things to be true, but instead taking very seriously what it means to understand truth from within the contextual, embodied, social, cultural, linguistic, historical spaces where we find ourselves. So for Westphal, when he talks about the idea of doing philosophy of religion, he's less interested in giving arguments for the existence of God or substantive replies to the problem of evil. And instead, he's trying to say, well, what are the stakes by which we would even claim something like knowledge of the divine? What does it even look like to think about faith as distinguished from conceptions of reason if we no longer take seriously the absolutist and objectivist models that modernity bequeathed to us? In other words, if we can't get out of our own perspective, what then can we say about God? Famously, the way that Westphal puts this is postmodernism effectively is just the idea that you can't peek over God's shoulder. You only can see things from where you stand. Now, this does not mean, however, for Westphal, that we can't then hold determinate religious beliefs. He identifies as a Christian, and what that means for him is to hold particular truth claims about the divine as anchored in a very determinate tradition that tells us the way things are in some respect. But to claim that this is the way things are is something claimed by us in our locations and in our communities. And those communities are always interpretive. They are the spaces where meaning is made, not just discovered. So this broad framework of epistemological postmodernism or a Kantian anti-realism is effectively the idea that I refer to in some of my work as religion with religion. It's concerned with the broad structures by which something like religion can be discussed, but it also takes seriously the metaphysical possibilities that a particular determinate religious tradition might also be true. Now, alternatively, John Caputo, or Jack as he is known to his friends, suggests that when we think postmodernism as a practice, as a thing that we are impacted by, not just an intellectual exercise, it really does change what we are able to take seriously. Some things are just put off the table as no longer plausible, no longer gaining traction in relationship to the awareness we now have of how power and history and culture and embodiment function to shape what things mean. So for Caputo, he will talk more about a kind of Hegelian postmodernism. It's a kind of view that says it's not so much that we just can't know that we know things, but what things are radically shaped and impacted by what it is that we do in relation to them. So although Merold Westphal will suggest that God might have a perspective on things, but we can't peek over God's shoulder to know it, Caputo wants to challenge the idea that there is such a God's eye view in the first place. That would seem to resort back to an objectivist account of the real that postmodernists like us should well do away with. Now, how does that then play out for religion? Well, for Caputo, this means that very determinate religious traditions like classical theism, say, are going to run into very big problems because they seem to require us to make truth claims about things. But those things don't actually have that kind of separate, radical, independent existence. They are not objective. The way he puts this is God does not exist, God insists. God is a name by which we live in the world and transform our structures. But that's very different than Westphal, who says, look, as a Christian, I actually hold to very determinate beliefs about traditional creeds. But the way we hold them has to be radically humble and radically hermeneutically aware. So the difference between Westphal and Caputo is between religion with religion, the structures of this indeterminacy, of this postmodern awareness, but yet being able to be deployed internal to determinate traditions, religion with religion, Westphal's view, and religion without religion, which is Caputo's view that he draws from Jacques Derrida, whereby the structures of promise, expectation, gifting, anticipation, these are all modes by which we inhabit a different way of living. But they are not to be found most importantly in these determinate traditions, because those determinate traditions forget that radical humility that is required in relationship to what we take to be the case in the first place. Now, I know this can sound kind of tricky and complicated, but I'm going to try to unpack it over the next couple weeks. But for now, I hope it's helpful to realize two different conceptions of the postmodern. One is epistemic. It's about how we relate to what we take to be the case. We relate to it humbly. We relate to it in communities of meaning and interpretation. Merold Westphal, religion with religion. And alternatively, a way of relating to the postmodern as putting out of bounds or off the table any account of a determinate case that would rise up majestically or objectively separate from the communities doing the work of actually constituting their truth in the first place. Religion without religion. The structures, but not the content. Now, I'm going to leave it to you which one you find most compelling. For me, I certainly side with Merold Westphal. I wrote a whole book, actually, trying to talk about these sorts of things and defending the religion with religion perspective as more plausible. Next week, we're going to talk about why. Until then, I hope you'll get subscribed here on YouTube, hop over to my Substack, Philosophy in the Wild, and make sure that you check out my website, jaronsimmons.com, for all kinds of other content. Thanks as always. I'll see you next time, unless a piano falls on our heads.